Broncos country, welcome back to another video here on the Parker Love Sports YouTube channel. I know it's been a while, I had some stuff to deal with, but in today's video, we're going to be going over 3 Broncos mock drafts that I made. Now, these are going to only be going through the first 4 rounds because with the stuff I've been dealing with, I haven't had a whole lot of time to dive deep into all these prospects of this year's draft. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to do that soon for the NFL draft streams, but I just want to go through a couple of different scenarios that could happen on draft night for the Broncos. Because at first, when you look at this team, you're like, okay, I feel like it's cut and dry. We want to take a weapon, a receiver, a tight end for Bo Nix in the early rounds, like address running back, tight end, receiver. But I think there are a couple different options that the Broncos could go depending on certain players that are available at pick 20. So I just want to go through a couple mock drafts. Now, before we do get into that, just know that some of these players might not be there at pick 20, and that's fine. This is just different scenarios, and, they could be there. They could not be there. I'm just going to go over a couple of different scenarios for the Broncos, and you let me know what you think of in the comment section below of which mock draft you prefer, because honestly, I would be happy with any of these personally, but then again, I made them, so obviously there's a little bias towards each of them for me, but I try to go in just open-minded and give different scenarios, different players that the Broncos could go. I try not to double up on any player, so I guess you could technically mix and match which rounds you wanted for the players available. But yeah, this is just a look to see what type of options the Broncos could have. As always, I want to remind you that Jesus loves you no matter who you are, and let's get straight into this video. Now, here are the draft picks that the Denver Broncos currently possess for this upcoming draft. We have our first, second, third, fourth, and sixth round picks. We, of course, don't have our fifth round pick. All of those are our own. But we also have a sixth round pick from the Arizona Cardinals when we traded Baron Browning to the Cardinals. And we have a sixth round pick from the Philadelphia Eagles when we traded Albert Okwuegbunam over to the Eagles. I think it was last season, not this past season, but the one prior to that. We traded Albert O over to the Eagles in exchange for that sixth round pick. Now, we won't be using any of the sixth round picks in these mocks. If you want me to go and do a full 7-round mock draft for the Broncos, let me know. And there's also going to be no trades in this video. I'm going to wait until after the combine to start doing potential trades for the Broncos. Now, let's get started into this. Here is the first mock draft that I want to go over. So, with the 20th pick, I have us selecting Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri. As of right now, I think my preferred target for the Broncos would be Luther Burden at pick 20. I haven't done a full kind of ranking of who I want. I was thinking about doing that before the combine, but I decided let's wait till after the combine. Let's wait till we get closer to the draft to kind of rank the guys who I would want the Broncos to take in the first round. But right now, if I were to make a list, Luther Burden sits atop that list. Now, he is a little bit undersized. He's a little bit, I guess not undersized, but he is a little bit smaller of a receiver, but he's a guy who creates separation and he will use his route running ability to get open. And I think that's a big part of the Broncos receivers and weapons that currently lack. I don't feel like we can get open that often and that well. We got Sutton, he's a deep ball guy, I should say the jump ball guy. Marvin Mims is more of the deep ball go route type of guy. Luther Burden is more of the route runner, route technician to get open, and he can play in the slot or on the outside. So in my opinion, I would love for the Broncos to go ahead and pick up Luther Burden. You can see what he's done at the University of Missouri in his 38 games, 192 receptions, 2,263 yards, 21 touchdowns. He averages 11.8 yards per reception. Now, I thought he would go a lot higher than this, but in a lot of mock drafts, he's constantly falling 220 past 20. And, I don't know if he makes it there, but he did not have the greatest quarterback play with Brady Cook this past season. And I do think that's maybe making him slip a little bit further. And that could help the Broncos get their potential wide receiver one of the future here in Luther Burden. Now, if the Broncos were to draft Luther Burden, this is how I would expect the receiving core to shape out. I'd expect Courtland Sutton still being the X receiver for the Broncos, has that chemistry with Sutton. Then you have Luther Burden as the number 2. Mims Moore is that number 3 slot type of guy. You got Troy Franklin, who I still really like and who I still have a lot of high hopes for, and he's got a lot of upside in my opinion. Still developing, but I do like the upside that Franklin brings. Of course, Devon Vele, who had a really solid rookie season. And then I guess you could throw another guy like an A.T. Perry in there as well if the Broncos do decide to keep more. But for right now, I do think this is how the Broncos receiving room would shape out if we drafted Luther Burden. Moving on to the second round, and I don't know if this guy's going to be here at pick 51. It's Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. He's been getting a lot of buzz these past few days, and honestly, I've seen a lot of people take him in the first round. I do think he's going to be the third running back to go behind Genty and Amari and Hampton. Although I'm not as high on Hampton as a lot of people are, I do still think that Henderson is the third running back to be taken. And he's kind of that guy he's kind of that complete running back. He's got the breakaway speed if you need him to break a run. He's got great vision, great juking. He's a solid pass protector in the backfield as well if you need him to stay back there and be an extra blocker for Bo Nix. And he can be a receiving threat. I don't know if this guy makes it to the second round. And if he does, I don't think he makes it to pick 51. I think the Broncos would have to move up in the second round if he falls, but Travion Henderson is one of those guys who I would really, really want in the second round. I think for me, in the second round right now, it's between the 2 Ohio State running backs. I would love either Travion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins in the second round. I think either of those guys would be the ideal fit. If you had to ask me which one I would prefer, I'd probably say Henderson. But if I had to guess which one fits more of the Sean Payton type of mold, I think that would go to towards Judkins. However, I would be happy with either of those running backs. You can see what he's done in college. 590 rushing attempts, 3,700 yards, 6.4 yards per carry, and 42 touchdowns. Of course, some of those numbers did come down a little bit. He could have even better numbers, but it was a split backfield between him and Judkins. And, it honestly kind of helped keep the wear and tear down a little bit for both of them, and they're both great prospects. But Travion Henderson here in the second round is my selection, and if the Broncos selected him, I immediately think he would be RB1 on this team. Of course, Travion Henderson, RB1 would be the bell cow, would be the lead guy in Denver. Then you would have Jaleel McLaughlin kind of as that scat back, elusive back. Audric Estimate as that thumper, pounding back. Tyler Beatty, I like as an upside guy who could potentially be on the roster. Blake Watson, a UDFA from last season. Not saying all these guys are going to make the roster, but this is kind of just how I see the running back room shaping out if we did select Travion Henderson in the second round. Now, moving on to the third round, I have us selecting Jordan Burch, defensive lineman out of Oregon. Maybe a little bit of a surprise that I didn't go tight end here. Didn't love any of the value at tight end at this spot. I think if we miss out on Warren, if we miss out on Loveland, if we miss out on Harold Fannin, maybe Elijah Arroyo, though I don't know how I feel about taking him in the second. I do think we need to address defensive line at some point in this draft. We saw what the dominant defensive line can do for the Eagles, and I mean that defensive line is insane with Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. You got Josh Sweat. What an insane defensive line. We kind of have some of those pieces. Malcolm Roach is a solid depth guy. You got Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers. You got Nick Benito. You got Jonathan Cooper. Some solid guys there. But I would really like to bolster that interior of the defensive line. And Jordan Burch is one of those guys out of Oregon who I think can help not only provide a solid run stopper, but interior pass rush, which I think will help us, honestly, against our division rivals. The AFC West is kind of loading up. The Chargers, they've got a really solid offensive line. I can't even lie. They got a really solid offensive line. We saw what happened to the Chiefs offensive line in the Super Bowl with a good defensive line. And so I do think we still need to add talent to that defensive line. It's good, but I think it can be bolstered, and we can see what a good defensive line can do for a team. You can see what Jordan Burch has done for the Oregon Ducks in his career. Now, here's how I see him sliding in. I don't know if he would necessarily start right away. You got Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers as the defensive ends in the 3-4 system. They're going to be the edge rushers, and then you're going to have one defensive tackle up the middle. That could be DJ Jones if we bring him back in free agency. I don't know if we are. We'll have to see. But you got Malcolm Roach, who's another solid defensive tackle who could start there. Maybe you start Jordan Burch if you take him here. But I kind of see him maybe sitting for the first few weeks, developing, and then getting his chance a little bit later into the season. I like the upside that he brings. But is he a starter right away? I'm not so sure. Maybe he could be, but I would see him more as that fourth type of guy, maybe the backup defensive tackle if we were to draft him. Didn't mean to move on to the next slide, but here in the fourth round, I do have us selecting Gunnar Helm, tight end out of Texas. Maybe I'm a little bit higher on Gunnar Helm than a lot of other people, but I think we need a guy who is a receiving threat at the tight end position. Now, we got kind of Adam Troutman, who's that hybrid guy, receiving, blocking. Doesn't excel at either, but he can do both. You got Nate Adkins, but I want a guy who can be a receiving threat and a weapon at the tight end position, but also hold their own a little bit in the blocking game, and Gunnar Helm can do that. Does he fall to the fourth? Maybe not. Again, I don't know. The values are kind of crazy. Players are going to rise and fall at the combine, which, by the way, when you're watching this, the combine starts today. Tomorrow for when I'm recording this, but today for you. But Gunnar Helm is a guy who I do think can be a threat as a receiver and also as a blocker. That's going to help Bo Nix out by not only giving him another weapon downfield, but also giving him another, pass protector, because tight ends can be a dual threat weapon, not only helping protect the quarterback, but also helping be a target for the quarterback downfield. And I think Gunnar Helm can provide just that. If he were to be slotted onto this team, right now I would put him at tight end 2. I think Troutman, if we bring him back, I can't remember if he's on a contract here or not, I think he would still be tight end 1, but I think Gunnar Helm slots in there right as tight end 2 and has the ability to take over for tight end 1 pretty early in the season. And then you got Lucas Kroll, who I know a lot of Broncos fans like. I'm not as high on Lucas Kroll as a lot of other Broncos fans, but I do still think he's there. And then Nate Atkins, who had a solid season last year, but I think he's kind of that tight end 3, tight end 4 type of guy who's going to be your tight end fullback hybrid type of guy if you need. Now, let's move on to mock draft 2. After all this is said and done, let me know if you prefer the first, second, or third mock draft in the comment section below. But here is the second mock draft for the Denver Broncos. And it's going to start with us taking Walter Nolan, defensive lineman out of Ole Miss, in the first round. Now, I don't know if Walter Nolan is going to fall to us. There's been some talk where, there's some concern, so maybe he's going to slip in the draft, but he's also a really talented player that he could get taken before he even gets to us. Absolutely. In this scenario, he fell to us at pick 20, so I immediately snatched him up. And the same thing I said about Jordan Burch is Walter Nolan would be a disruptor on the defensive line, not only providing interior pass rush, but helping us stop the run as well. Walter Nolan is a beast, and quite frankly, I don't think he falls to us, but depending on how the board plays out, I would be thrilled to take Walter Nolan. There's only a couple players that I would take over Walter Nolan. The first one, like I mentioned personally, Luther Burden. I might take Emeka Egbuka over him, and then it's not going to happen, but if Tyler Warren fell to this pick, I'd probably take Tyler Warren over him, and then Ashton Genty. There's a very few amount of players, maybe even Malachi Starks, but there's very few players that I would take over Walter Nolan in this draft. And I don't even know if Starks would overtake him. To me, Walter Nolan would be an immediate impact. Is it a sexy pick? No. But there are so many guys in this draft who will be an impact defensive lineman. Walter Nolan happens to be one of the best in this class, and he would be a fantastic pickup for the Broncos at pick 20, depending on how the rest of the board plays out. Like I mentioned earlier, there's some guys who I'd still take over him, but it's not a lot. If we were to plug him in, I would say, it's kind of hard because this is ranking our defensive ends and defensive tackles with the 3-4 system. But I would slot him right behind Zach Allen. After the last season, Zach Allen has to be the number 1 defensive lineman for us. But Walter Nolan would be right there. I think if it were to be the starters in the 3-4 system, I think at nose tackle, it would be Walter Nolan, and then you would have Zach Allen and John Franklin Myers as the two defensive ends, and then as the edge rushers, it would be Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper coming off of the edge, with Malcolm Roach being a rotational guy for running downs. And honestly, Malcolm Roach is he's a solid depth, a solid number 2, a solid rotational guy for the Broncos at that defensive tackle position. But yeah, Walter Nolan, fantastic pickup, and he would be an immediate impact for the Broncos. As for the second round pick, mentioned him earlier, it's going to be Quinshon Judkins. I do think Judkins more so fits the style of running back Sean Payton likes, but I could see him going after Travion Henderson or Judkins. Of course, Judkins, the transfer from Ole Miss at the start of the season, goes to Ohio State and helps them win the national championship. He had a great national championship, hit both him and Travion Henderson, both bell cow, both running back ones on an NFL roster. If we go back to last season, I was watching some of my draft videos and other people's draft videos from last season. I wasn't crazy about that running back class. Of course, I had Braylon Allen as my running back 1 who I liked, but then, there's Trey Benson, there's a couple other guys, but none of them really compare to this running back class where I think you can find RB1s across the board. This is a special running back class, and, Judkins, Travion Henderson, they just happen to be some of the best in this class. I would say if I had to rank the top 4 backs, I would say it's probably Ashton Jeanty number 1, Amarian Hampton number 2, but like I said, I'm not as high on him as a lot of other people are. Travion Henderson at number 3, and Quinshon Judkins at number 4. I think any 4 of them coming to the Broncos would be a very, very positive asset for the Broncos because we need to establish a running game. We need to help Bo Nix out as much as possible, and Judkins would help us do just that. Where would Judkins slot in? He would also be running back 1 on this team. And like I mentioned, McLaughlin, Estime, Beatty, and Watson would be the guys behind him. I do still like the upside that Estime brings. I think he's a solid RB2 in the future. I don't know if he ever takes over that bell cow role. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think this is how it pans out. You have McLaughlin kind of as that scat back. You have Estime as the power back, and then you got Beatty, Watson, depth guys, but you would have Quinshon Judkins as the RB1 on this team. Next up, in the 3rd round, I have us selecting Tez Johnson, wide receiver out of Oregon, and maybe this is more so because of the storyline. Tez Johnson, of course, every Broncos fan knows this, is the adopted brother of Bo Nix, so why not reunite the two, rebuild the 2024 Oregon Ducks. But yeah, Tez Johnson isn't just the adopted brother, though, of Bo Nix. Tez Johnson is a fantastic player in his own right, a player who gets open. He's got a lot of speed. However, the one kind of drawback that I have of the Broncos selecting Tez Johnson is he kind of plays that Marvin Mims role, special teamer, returner, going to be a guy who can play on the slot or the outside, be that deep threat guy. So I feel like their skill sets overlap. I do think we need to get another weapon for Bo Nix, but are Marvin Mims and Tez Johnson's play style too similar to find them both roles in the offense? That would be my main concern. And then another concern is he is on the smaller side. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be a downside. It's just some corners maybe are going to be bigger than him, and so he's going to have to find a way to get open. Not going to really be the physical jump ball guy. He's not going to be able to go up and get passes, but you're going to have to hit him in stride, hit him when he gets open. And so I do like Tez Johnson, and I would be thrilled to reunite Bo and Tez. I'm just a little bit concerned whether, Bo, I'm concerned if there's the overlap with Marvin Mims. So we'll have to see what Sean Payton, what the coaching staff, what everyone thinks inside the Broncos facility. But I'd be all for bringing Tez Johnson to Denver. Yeah, I've said my piece. I was going to go ahead and repeat again, but I've said my piece. Would like Tez Johnson, but we will have to see. If you were to slot in, I would say it would still be Sutton and Mims, then Tez Johnson as that 3rd guy. You got Troy Franklin as well, and Devon Vele. So Cortez kind of in there. But yeah, we'll have to see what his role would be if he does come to Denver. And then in the 4th round, let's get Bo another weapon. And not only another weapon from Oregon, another weapon he's familiar with, but a Colorado kid, a Colorado native in Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. I believe he went to, what was it? I think it's Heritage High School he went to. But I could be wrong on that. But he is a Colorado native. 53 games, has 134 receptions, 1,537 yards, 11.5 yards per reception, and 16 touchdowns. And he kind of reminds me, he reminds me of kind of a better Adam Trautman. He's going to be solid in both blocking and receiving. Maybe doesn't excel at one or the other, but I think he would be great at both. And I think eventually he would take Adam Trautman over as that tight end one after a little bit of time and development. I don't think he would start right away. I still think it would be Trautman, go with the veteran. Again, I can't remember if he's on a contract year or not, but if you bring him back. But then I'd have Terrence Ferguson as that number 2 learning under Trautman, with Kroll and Atkins being the backups there. Now, if you preferred mock draft number 2, let me know in the comment section below. And also, if you want to mix and match, if you want to say, hey, I like mock draft 1's first round pick, I like mock draft 3's second round pick, so on and so on, you can do that in the comment section below. This is just kind of, different scenarios that could happen. But in mock draft 3, with the 20th pick, I have us selecting Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia. Again, another player who, how it's looking, might fall to us, but probably doesn't. He did in this scenario, though, and safeties typically fall in the draft. If you remember 2 drafts ago, back in 2023, I was a big Brian Branch fan. Thought he was going to go in the late first, falls all the way to the mid-second. Safeties typically fall, but Malachi Starks is one of those safety prospects where I look at him and I'm like, yeah, that guy's a baller at safety. I'm typically a lot of safety prospects I'm not the biggest fan of, but he kind of reminds me, I would say he's sort of on the level of Kyle Hamilton when he was coming out as a prospect out of Notre Dame. He's one of those solid to elite safety prospects. I would say elite. I'm not going to say the word generational because that gets thrown around way too loosely, but he is one of those elite safety prospects who could make an impact on the backside, and I do think we could use an upgrade at safety. That this is, of course, barring the fact that we don't sign Javon Holland in free agency, who I'm really hoping we target. If we do sign Javon Holland, I would say Starks is probably off the board, but Malachi Starks would be one of those guys. If he's there, I would seriously be considering it. If, say, Burden's gone, Abuka's gone, Nolan's gone, Tyler Warren's gone, maybe heck even, Colston Loveland's gone. I know Colston Loveland is a tricky topic to talk about. I know the Broncos country, we're divided on it right now. But if he's gone, I'd seriously consider taking Starks if he's available, depending on how the rest of the board plays out. I really like Malachi Starks as a prospect, and I think he would be an impact for the Broncos defense next season. To me, he would be safety 1. And I know Brandon Jones had a great season. I know he did. I think I would assume Starks would be the free safety and Brandon Jones would be the strong safety, but you never know. I think that would be our safety tandem to start. And then you got PJ Locke, who started last year, who, love PJ Locke, but he didn't have the greatest season. And then JL Skinner, who I still have a lot of high hope and a lot of I still think he has a lot of upside as a 6th round pick, just a physical player, gonna make a tackle, not afraid to get hit. I still like JL Skinner, but I would say this is how the safety room would play out. Of course, you still have Delaren Turner-Yell potentially as another option, but this is how I would expect the safety room to look for the Broncos if we were to select Malachi Starks. And then in the 2nd round, instead of running back, I'm going with Jalen Royals, a wide receiver out of Utah State, giving Bo another weapon. Now, he kind of reminds me of another guy. He's like a route runner type of guy, like I mentioned with Burden. Not to the same level, but someone who can just get open for Bo Nix, create some separation, which was seriously lacking last season for the Broncos, and I felt bad for Bo. But Jalen Royals is a guy who can do that. There's a couple guys in this range, Xavier Restrepo, but I went with Royals. I think Royals is a guy who, he has been getting some first round buzz. I don't think he's a first round player for me personally at this moment, but he's a guy who I'd target in the second round depending on who's there. I think a couple guys in this receiving class could slip to the second round. If you look at the first round, I'd say T-Mac, Tedoroy, and McMillan would be one of the guys taken. I would say Luther Burden, and then I would say Emeka Ibuka. Those are first-round locks. A guy who kind of is sometimes in the first round, sometimes not, is a Matthew Golden. Then you've got Trey Harris as well, and then maybe Jalen Royals right behind those guys. Potentially, we'll have to see if he falls, but Jalen Royals is a guy who I really like for Bo Nix to get him that different type of weapon. Then you have a guy, you got Cortland Sutton for the jump ball. You got Marvin Mims going deep on the go routes. You got Jalen Royals using his route running to create separation. So to me, I really like Jalen Royals in the second round. Maybe he doesn't fall to us this far, but he is a guy who I would seriously consider targeting. Next up, I guess this is how I would see Jalen Royals as a receiver. Of course, went to a smaller school in Utah State, but that doesn't really bother me. There's a lot of guys who go to smaller schools who turn out just fine in the NFL, but it'd be Sutton, Mims, Royals, Franklin, and then Vele as the top 5 receivers. Moving on to the third round, we got Dylan Sampson, running back out of Tennessee, another guy who I really like for the Broncos to be a potential RB1 this season. Now, Sampson is a guy who, you could probably get in the third round. We'll have to see. But he's one of those guys who I really like for the Broncos as well. He's kind of the Jalen Wright mold who went to Tennessee last year, who he kind of reminds me of him. And maybe it's just because they're both wearing Tennessee Volunteers jerseys, but he's a guy who I think the Broncos could be targeting in the later rounds. This is such a deep running back class that you can get a quality starter, a quality RB1 in the third, fourth round. You can get some really, really solid running back depth in this class. It is a special running back class. And, Sampson is one of those guys who I really like for the Broncos. And I'll say this right now, and I know a lot of Broncos fans are probably going to get mad at me. I'm not the biggest Caleb Johnson fan. I would not prefer him as a running back. But for now, Dylan Sampson is a guy who I'd like for the Broncos to target. You can see 2,400 yards in 35 games, averages 5.9 per carry and 35 touchdowns. Sampson would, in my opinion, he would be the instant RB1 on this team again. I think there are a lot of running backs you could take in this class who would be the running back 1 on this team, no matter where you selected them. If I go to my running back rankings, which I don't have pulled up, I wish I did, I could probably go down a good few of all who would be starters for the Broncos if we were drafted and if they were thrown into the lineup today. This is a special running back class. And then in the fourth round, I don't know if he's going to be here. He was in this mock draft, but when I was doing some research, it looks like he's a guy who's creeping up draft boards. But Barrett Carter, right now, if he's there in the fourth round, I would take a flyer. I'm not a flyer on. He's a really good prospect who I would take to bolster our interior linebackers. Singleton went down early, and right now he could be a potential cap casualty. He could potentially be cut from some reports and some rumors, so we'll have to see. Cody Barton, he had a better season than I expected. Justin Strnad had a better season than I expected, but I think Barton and Strnad are both going to be free agents. You got Drew Sanders, who's apparently, according to George Payton, working out at inside linebacker, which I like, which is what I thought we drafted him for 2 years ago in 2023. But we need a guy there, and I think Barrett Carter is a stud at inside linebacker and a position that we've desperately needed to upgrade for a while now. So Barrett Carter is the final pick in this mock draft out of Clemson in the fourth round. And if I were to slot him in, I'd say Singleton probably linebacker 1, depending on what happens with him if he gets cut. Then Carter at number 2. 3, Drew Sanders. We'll have to see how he looks at an inside linebacker because obviously 23 was his rookie year. He played some inside linebacker, some edge. Then he got hurt for pretty much all last season, came back late in the year. I can't remember if he came back and played like the week before against the Chiefs or if he came back in the playoff game, but I think played one snap, got a sack coming off the edge, but didn't play much of inside linebacker. So we'll have to see how Drew Sanders performs at inside linebacker next season. And then we have UDFA Lavelle Bailey as that fourth guy for the Broncos. But yeah, those are my 3 mock drafts. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are brand new. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Parker, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.